Hello and welcome to episode 14 of Cruise Altitude, our light-hearted look at the world of aviation from the other side of the cockpit door. I'm Si.
And I'm John.
Coming up this episode, we look at what has happened to all those aircraft that are currently waiting to return to the air. Why do we always board on the left? And where has Cruise Altitude landed now? So John, before we get any further into this episode, we have to address the most important thing in everyone's life at the moment, which is, of course, Line of Duty. Have you been watching it?
I have, yeah.
Okay,
Series 6.
Whoa, don't spoil it for me. I am 5 episodes in, because instead of watching it every Sunday night for the last 7 weeks or whatever, I haven't got the patience for that and waiting each week, so I've just recorded every episode and I'm now binge watching it. So I've got 2 to go.
You got 2 to go.
So don't ruin it for me. But
I won't say anything.
Yeah.
How have you managed to do this? Because I can't go anywhere without seeing somewhere written on Twitter or social media or whatever about what's going on in Line of Duty. So how are you keeping away from all that?
I've had to switch everything off. I can't even watch the news at the moment for the fear of somebody coming on and
it's been everywhere
the end for me. So I'm going to try and finish it tonight. But every comment I have seen though, it's always been about the end. Everyone said, oh, the end, what a letdown, what a disappointment. And I'm sitting there, I'm at the end of episode 5, I'm gripped, I'm thinking this is brilliant. But in the back of my mind, I'm now thinking, but the end's going to be rubbish.
Well, those of you who don't know what we're talking about, Line of Duty is a series over here in the UK which has been shown on the BBC. But you can, I think it's on a couple of the streaming services, so you can go back and watch, this was Series 6, so you can go back and watch the back catalogue through there, see what we're going on about. But
yeah, don't start at Series 6, otherwise you'll be super confused. You've got to start at the beginning.
Yeah. You've got to start at the beginning. Well, you can probably you probably do the start at the beginning. I think the thing about the ending side, I've watched it and I know what they're saying. I won't give any spoilers, but I know what they're saying. The thing is, the first 5 series, the end episode was kind of like the gripper, lots of twists, and you're thinking, oh my God, what's happening next? But yeah, this one may be a little bit of a letdown, but it's still pretty good. You've got to stick with it.
See, everyone's just thinking about the end, and I'm sitting there in episode 5 and I'm thinking, this is brilliant. So I don't know, I'll wait and see. But do you know what, John? It made me think about like a flight. You know when you go to pick somebody up from the airport and someone, you say to them, oh, how was your flight? And the first thing they'll say is like, oh, the landing was rubbish. Or, we had to wait ages to get off the plane. They just remember the end.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, didn't you have like a nice 3-course meal and a gin and tonic and the crew were lovely and your bags arrived on time? Never mention that bit, do they? It's always like, the last thing they remember is the end. It seems like Line of Duty is exactly the same. So anyway.
So when they say one of those sort of Patricia Carmichael little smiles, if you're a fan of the show, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Anyway.
Hey ho.
I'll report back on my findings of the end next time.
So aside from binge watching Line of Duty side, what else have you been up to?
Well, I did have to fly a plane. Not for very long, admittedly. It's just an 11-minute flight moving an aircraft that had been parked up at one airport down to another airport for a bit more parking. Because a lot of aircraft that are not in the skies at the moment, are there still, with all the suppressed demand, and airlines have had to find places to park their aircraft to keep them in a sort of state that they can return to service fairly quickly as and when demand picks up.
So an 11-minute flight then, pretty short.
Yeah. How's that work? It went by in a flash, to be honest with you. And when you haven't done an awful lot of flying in recent times, an 11-minute flight can feel an awful lot quicker as well.
No time for a meal.
No, absolutely. Anyway, how about you? Picked up on any news recently?
Not a lot been going. Actually, I did see something the other day. So those of you who are regular listeners, you remember, I think it was back in episode 10 now, wasn't it? We had Sam the pilot on.
We did.
And she came to talk about women in aviation for a Women in Aviation special. So Sam's had some news this week. She put that on her Instagram page to say that she's going back flying. So you might remember from that episode, Sam was flying a 747, and obviously the airplanes have been retired. So she was waiting on a new course. Yeah. So it looks like she's off to fly the 777.
Oh, fantastic.
So that was pretty good. So good luck to Sam from us all here. Maybe she'll come back and tell us all about it.
Yeah, that'd be great, wouldn't it? Good luck, Sam.
When the course is done.
Yeah, go well.
Yeah, and
Brill.
Yeah.
Well, John, I've been. I was flicking through our emails and I was trying to find the correspondence that we requested from our friend in El Salvador in our last episode, but he's not been in touch. So I'm a little bit disappointed. So whoever you were listening in El Salvador, we're still waiting to hear from you. So where are you?
It's not too late.
But John,
yeah.
but we have landed in somewhere new in our last episode. Ready for this?
Go on. Where have we landed in this week?
We have landed the Cruise Altitude podcast in Bahrain.
Oh wow!
Have you been to Bahrain, John?
I have actually been to Bahrain. Yeah. I spent quite a bit of time there.
So you know where it is then?
I do. Yeah, it's a little island in the Middle East.
It is in the Persian Gulf. In fact, do you remember the name of the airport in Bahrain?
No, do you know what?
This is another very tricky one.
I think it's changed. I haven't been to Bahrain for about, let me think, 12 years, and I think they've got a new airport now. But it's a tricky one. Do I need a clue or?
No, you won't need a clue.
Is it Bahrain Airport?
Bahrain International Airport, correct? Yeah. The code is OBBI for those who like airport codes. In the Persian Gulf, main airline of Bahrain.
That's Gulf Air, isn't it?
Gulf Air, yeah. I like this fact I looked up about Bahrain, John. So it's the third smallest country in Asia.
There you go.
Any idea what the other two are?
I don't know. Third smallest country. I mean, Singapore's probably going to be on there, isn't it? Because that's just a city island state. I don't know. Next, no, go on. Enlighten me.
Well, Bahrain's actually like an archipelago, isn't it? So it's a group of islands. So this other country is also a group of islands. That helps. So the Indian Ocean.
I like how you didn't write the word archipelago in the notes. So I obviously couldn't come up with a spelling on that one. But anyway, go on. So it's a group of islands. Well, so the second biggest one.
You'll need a towel. Some sun cream, a cocktail.
Seychelles or something like
that. Close.
The Maldives.
Very good, the Maldives, yeah. So there you go, Bahrain, third smallest country in Asia behind Singapore and the Maldives. There's some Bahrain facts for you.
I was expecting a bridge stat.
There is a bridge, isn't there? Because it might be an island, but you don't have to get your feet wet or go on a boat. You can just drive straight over the bridge.
King Fahd Causeway, yeah. Bahrain to Saudi Arabia.
There you go.
I've been on that.
We never knew you were such a wealth of knowledge about Bahrain. But whoever you were listening to us in Bahrain, thanks very much for tuning in to Cruise Altitude. And get in touch, let us know who you were and what you were doing in Bahrain.
So, over recent weeks then, we've talked about how airlines are having to manage crewing levels to suit demand at the moment as we go through the COVID pandemic. One thing, Si, that we haven't discussed is the need for airlines to make sure they've got the right fleet size. And so to that end, the correct aircraft ready to fly at any one time. So lots and lots of aircraft have been retired due to reducing fleet sizes, but there's also lots of airplanes that aren't actually required currently with the reduced demands, but the plan is to return to service. So you have a look at this for us this week, and what did you find out? What do airlines do with aircraft that aren't currently flying?
Well, firstly, John, it's probably best to consider what maintenance an aircraft needs in sort of more normal times. So, when they're flying all the time and they're not on the ground for extended periods. So, essentially, every day they have a daily check, which is some kind of very basic maintenance where they kind of look at general things and just check over things such as engine oil levels, just to make sure they're all topped up and ready to go for the next day. Then they have a weekly check, which might involve some slightly deeper inspections, like maybe checking for water contamination, the fuel, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And then aircraft are also cycled through various deeper engineering packages. They're largely dependent on flight hours, and they can involve some pretty significant maintenance. So anything from an engine refit to changing out the landing gear. These are on sort of 2, 3, 4, 5 year cycles. It very much depends. So those are kind of the sort of elements that would happen normally. But obviously during the pandemic, when aircraft are not in the air and not flying every day, things have changed a little bit.
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously at the moment, as we're sort of still emerging from this pandemic, I mean, there's so many excess aircraft, and airlines have got a choice, haven't they, of what they're going to do with their fleet. So really, I suppose that comes down to a decision to either to park them, to retire them, or to store them. So I hear sort of, parking and storing. So what's the difference between parking and storage?
Yeah, so essentially parking's, as it sort of suggests really, is more of a short-term option that airlines can take.
Yeah.
And storage is more of a long-term thing. So let's take parking first. The process of parking an aircraft for short periods, say of up to a month, isn't really a big deal. So provided the weather conditions are not extreme, aircraft can be parked in most locations around the world. And as part of that parking procedure, things like the landing gear wells and any other openings that could get objects ingested into them will be kind of sealed up to prevent things like a nesting bird. Exactly.
Yeah, nesting bird or something. Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
Sensors will be covered up for protection, probes, that kind of thing, to make sure they don't get hit by stuff or again get foreign objects in them. And then they're kind of routinely and fairly regularly checked, just as they would be for an aircraft that is still in service. So that kind of daily check and weekly check would sort of continue to a degree with a parked aircraft. Storage, however, is a much more involved package, and it's basically the process of putting an aircraft to sleep for a while. So if you store an aircraft, you've got to consider many other things alongside just the maintenance. So you've got to consider the cost of where you're going to park the aircraft, the location, obviously the climate is very, very important. Then think about things like operational readiness, how long it's going to take for the aircraft to come back into service, what ongoing maintenance it needs while it's in storage. Have you stored the aircraft anywhere near your maintenance base, or have you got to actually get your engineers to that aircraft somehow?
Bit of a logistical nightmare, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's obviously all the requirements of the manufacturer. So it's quite an involved process to actually put an aircraft into storage. It's quite a big decision, really.
But lots of aircraft have been stored, haven't they? I mean, I saw a report in simpleflying.com recently talking about the numbers, and it's huge, isn't it, across the world? A huge amount of aircraft have been stored. They have,
and I suppose it's important to say that parking requires a kind of ongoing maintenance, and there is an ongoing cost with it. However, when you've stored an aircraft, it kind of doesn't really cost the airline too much when it's in that storage state. It's more getting it into that state and getting it out of that state is where the cost comes. But as you say, there was that report in Simple Flying, and they had a look at how many aircraft around the world are in states of storage. They did look at it back in February, so a few months ago now. Right. But despite some bright spots and signs of life in the industry, the number of passenger flights were very suppressed back then, and they estimated that just 60% of passenger flights were operating back in February as compared to back in the same period in 2019.
Yeah.
So that means that there's a significant amount of planes that are therefore in storage, and they suggested that over 10,000 commercial passenger planes were in storage at that point.
Oh, that's a huge amount, isn't it? And where do you put them all? That's the
exactly.
They're not small, are they?
So. Totally. So they had a look at where aircraft are stored, or which regions are storing the most amount of aircraft. So they reckon that just under 30% of North American aircraft were in a state of storage. About 35% of European aircraft were stored. Just 6% of Latin American aircraft were in storage. Just over 10% of Middle Eastern and Africa were in storage, and about 20% of the Asia Pacific fleet. So, of those stats, really, the North American and the European sectors were.
Yeah, Europe particularly taken a big hit, hasn't it? Restrictions on flying. So, essentially, from all that, what I understand is the longer a plane is due to be on the ground, the more maintenance that it's going to need, isn't it, to prepare it for storage, or to be able to bring it back.
Yeah, that's right. So there's quite a lot of things that engineers will need to do to prepare these aircraft for storage. So for long-term storage, things like fuel, oil, water, and all hydraulic fluid systems will need to be drained, and where necessary replaced with conservation liquids to make sure that there's no corrosion whilst those liquids aren't flowing around. And then there's loads of other requirements that need to be addressed as well. So commonly windows are taped to prevent sunlight from decolouring the interior, so they're all covered up.
Oh right, I hadn't even thought of that.
Exactly. So landing gears and engines are thoroughly packed to prevent corrosion and birds nesting in them.
Because you see those sort of red covers, don't you? They're sort of quite typical on the front of the engine. You know.
That's it. Yeah, because you can imagine that the inside of
pulled over.
An engine is an ideal place for a little bird to take refuge. So they all get covered up, and then basically any other openings that are going to be vulnerable to things like sand or dirt, water, or any kind of insects and stuff like that, they're all wrapped up as well and made completely watertight. So this is going to include things like the air data probes, and as you said before, the engine intakes, the APU intakes, all that kind of stuff, and there's loads of those. So that's quite a lengthy process for those to all get covered up sufficiently. And then there's also the matter of greasing, cleaning, and preserving the landing gear and flight control systems. So obviously these systems are normally moving all the time, aren't they? And they stay very well lubricated and stuff. But as soon as you have a piece of machinery that you don't operate all the time, and you keep it in one particular, so they all have to be protected from that. And then inside the aircraft, there's lots of things that need to be done as well. So obviously they turn off all the switches in the cockpits, they'll disconnect the batteries, they put the window blinds down. All seats are covered up as well, apparently, to prevent dust from getting into them and just to keep them in a slightly cleaner state. So it's a pretty long list of jobs, and it can take quite a long time. But as I said before, once the aircraft is prepared for long-term storage, it doesn't actually require a massive amount of maintenance. But it does, however, take a lot of time to bring an aircraft from storage back out again. For a long-haul aircraft, typically it can take up to 2 weeks. So this does require some quite careful planning.
And so the manufacturers give instructions as well, don't they, on how to place aircraft into storage and how to maintain them and so on?
Yeah, that's right, John. This is really important. So manufacturer instructions must be followed for primary structures and systems to comply with the regulatory requirements and ensure an aircraft's future serviceability. So whatever the manufacturer says, you kind of got to do, really. It's really important that these are followed, and some airlines will have created dedicated storage plans to make sure that they are complying with all the restrictions and steps as they go. But of course, the central objective of storage managers is to ensure that an aircraft does not lose its airworthiness certificate, because that's absolutely key. And that has happened in times gone by after an aircraft's been inactive. And of course, if that were to happen, for example, one of the mandatory checks that's required by the manufacturer hasn't been completed, it would be very, very difficult to reinstate that airworthiness certificate. And that means, imagine ending up with an aircraft that's no longer airworthy, stored at a remote airport that you're unable to fly again. I mean,
you got
oops.
A bit of a problem, haven't you? Someone's head's going to roll for that one.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's why it's so important that an aircraft is under good care during a parking or storage period, and you don't want to find 2 or 3 no-go items that prevent it flying once you bring it back out of storage.
So, I mean, I guess like everything, flying related, it's expensive, isn't it? And I suppose costs got to be factored into a lot of these decisions. I'm thinking, specifically I've got an airplane I need to store. If you want to park it at Los Angeles, for example, I imagine it's going to cost you an awful lot of money. So secondary airports will come into play, and I suppose cost is going to be a big part of that.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about who's got space and how expensive is that space. And, previously, pre-pandemic, when you've seen aircraft kind of stored, normally because they're end of life, they're quite often in the deserts, aren't they? Sort of miles away from anywhere. They're not generally parked up at LAX or Heathrow or somewhere like that. Yeah, and that's because main airports tend to charge, very, very high parking fees. And operators and lessors typically select secondary airports and smaller airports, or even dedicated storage locations as a place to put out-of-service aircraft for a while. It's not mandatory for them to send them to these special storage locations. They can put them where they want, really, but obviously dry locations are preferable. Corrosion's a really important thing to make sure that aircraft aren't susceptible to when they're on the ground. Aircraft aren't designed to be on the ground, are they? They're designed to be in the air.
I guess
and they don't like getting wet, do they? So somewhere dry with very, very low humidity is ideal, really. Hence the fact
we see so many in the desert, don't we? Places like Arizona or the Middle East, etc.
Yeah. And storage is one option, but if an airline doesn't think that an aircraft's going to fly again, you could argue that it'd be better to actually break the aircraft up when it's still got that, say, certificate of airworthiness or it's recently flown. Break it up sooner rather than later and sell off the parts. So normally that would be the engines, because they can invariably have a kind of greater value than the entire aircraft in its kind of built state. So if you're not going to fly an aircraft for a while, rip the engines off them and sell them, rather than leave the aircraft in the desert for 2 years with the engines on them having never been run.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of that recently with older aircraft as well, haven't we? So things like the 747, for example, through the COVID pandemic, a lot of those have been retired, haven't they?
They have, yeah.
So I guess depending on how many aircraft are in storage, there might be maintenance hold-ups because every aircraft will require some work. But airlines are going to, by now, I would hope, have sort of detailed plans about how they're going to get the aircraft back to service as demand returns, really, aren't they, to avoid delays?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if you think about what we talked about in previous episodes about trying to get, flight crews, pilots, cabin crews back in the right kind of numbers at the right times, the same applies to aircraft, really. And in the same way that a pilot requires a training package, an aircraft requires a maintenance package. So it's a really fine balancing act. And if you bring an aircraft out of storage and then all of a sudden you don't need it, do you put it back into storage? Do you keep it in a park state? There's cost implications. If you fly your aircraft from the desert back to LAX, but all of a sudden you realise you don't need it, but you're going to fly it back to the desert, are you going to leave it at LAX? It's a real fine balancing act. I suppose in summary, airlines have tended to keep younger and more efficient aircraft operating during the pandemic, which has allowed them more flexibility. Generally, it's meant lower cost for operating and also keeps aircraft in the air that are further away from requiring heavy maintenance checks, which come at a price as well. So, their fleet availability is better. Also, however, more complex issues such as ensuring the correct configuration and cabin standards are still available. These are all thrown into the mixing pot. So, if you want an aircraft with a first-class cabin, is that one of the ones you've got available to you right now, or is actually or are your aircraft first-class cabins in the fleet that you've decided to put into storage? So it's very, very difficult. And of course, one option is just to keep rotating aircraft. So you park them up until they're near the regulatory limits, then you rotate them back into your operational fleet for a little while, swap them with another aircraft. So this helps with stand-up planning. You can keep more aircraft in a park state rather than storing it, but you could argue that this probably is going to work out in the long term more expensive. And this is essentially what I was doing last week, was moving some parked aircraft around, sort of rotating them in and out of the operational fleet.
Well, I guess what we've learnt though is that, like anything that's been thrown upon the airline industry by this sort of COVID pandemic, it's all complicated, isn't it? Nothing simple, and it takes a lot of manpower and a lot of effort to get it all going. But yeah, let's hope to see more of those parts aircraft back flying. Maybe this time next year we'll be back to sort of where we were in 2019. Who knows?
Let's hope so.
So it's time to dip back into our mailbags. This is our regular segment where we answer the questions that you sent in to us. And as always, you can get in touch via our various social media platforms. That's Facebook, Twitter or Instagram, or via our website, cruisealtitude.com, where you'll find all the links. Or you can email us. It's cruisealtitude@outlook.com. So 3 questions this week, Si. I think question number 1 comes from Rob. Rob is in Mesa, Arizona. So out in the desert.
That's a good place to store aircraft, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? He's probably seen quite a few. A few of those, Rob.
Perfect timing.
Yeah. So Rob says, why do passengers always board from the left side of the plane?
That's a good question, actually, Rob. And yeah, you're right. We always do, don't we? We always get on the left side. Normally forward, forward left door, or sometimes forward and back. But
there's doors on either side, isn't there? So
there are doors on either side, and they're all in pairs. So apart from the fact there's pairs of doors for emergencies, we don't really use the right-hand side doors very much. But actually, it's quite simple, Rob. essentially the left-hand side of the aircraft is for passengers to get on and off, and then the right-hand side is for all the services the aircraft requires. So the sort of main deck doors on an aircraft, they'd be used for getting on and off all the catering. So sometimes as you're getting off a plane, if you look to your right, as you exit by the left, you might see the caterers on, removing the catering in the galley. So that's kind of what those doors are used for. The cleaners tend to get on that side as well. And then sort of down below on the ground level, as a passenger, you might go down some steps or a jetty and then sort of exit stage left. But on the right-hand side, you'll see all the services going on. So there's aircraft refuelers who will hook up normally on that side. And also that's where all the holds are. So where the luggage and cargo will be taken on off the aircraft. So they're basically two separate areas, aren't they? So right-hand side for services, left-hand side for customers.
So I guess that's the simple answer. Is it's just for simplicity, isn't it? So
and
keeps everybody safe. Passengers one side and other activity on the other side.
Absolutely.
There we go.
There you go.
There's your answer, Rob.
And also, if some airlines wanted to get their passengers off on the right-hand side and the jetty is always on the left, that would present a bit of a logistical problem.
Yeah. The airports are designed that way, aren't they? Yeah. Cool.
Great. Our second question, John, comes from Sam in Crawley, which is south of London. Sam says, here in the UK, it's been a very windy week.
Yes, it has. It's been really windy here. My palm tree's getting blown everywhere. So.
Palm tree climate, West Sussex. Anyway, she says, watching the aircraft land at Gatwick recently, I wondered, what is the maximum amount of wind a plane can land in? That's a good question, Sam, actually.
Well, firstly, well done for spotting an aircraft land at Gatwick. There's not been a lot, but yeah. No, good question, Sam. Well, I suppose the way to look at it, just to break it down a little bit, so there's three types of wind we've got to consider as pilots when we're sort of taking off or landing. First wind that we look at is the headwind, so that's the amount of wind ahead of the aircraft. Then we look at the tailwind, so that's the amount of wind behind the aircraft, and then of course the crosswind. So as it suggests, that's the side element of the wind. So aircraft always want to take off and land into a headwind, so as that it allows us to reduce the distance they require to get airborne or the distance that we need to bring the aircraft to a stop. But in general, commercial aircraft demonstrate a capability to land with a certain crosswind as well at the aircraft certification stage. And it's not a maximum limit, but it's a figure that most airlines will choose to use as a limit. So in aviation, we measure speed in knots, which is nautical miles per hour. And roughly, if you wanted to convert that into miles per hour, you multiply it by about 1.15. So the maximum wind limits, which is what you were asking for commercial aircraft, depend on lots of things. So the aircraft, the airport, and the direction of the wind compared to the direction of takeoff or landing. So there's no single maximum wind limit, as it'll depend on lots of things. So the direction, as I say, and the phase of flight. But in general terms, we want headwinds. They're good. So we've got no real limits for headwinds. Tailwinds of above about 10 miles an hour can start to cause problems and stop aircraft from taking off and landing. And generally speaking, crosswinds above about 40 miles an hour are what we want to avoid.
Yeah.
And would prevent us from sort of taking off and landing, wouldn't they, Si? So most airport runways are designed into the prevailing wind. And what I mean by that is the wind that we would expect for that part of the world. So here in the UK, for example, most of them are east-west, because we tend to get most of our winds coming off the Atlantic, blowing over the island into the continent.
So the runway direction is generally the same as the prevailing wind, give or take.
Exactly. What we want to avoid is strong crosswinds. We can take strong headwinds. We don't want strong tailwinds. So we can always flip the direction round for the headwind tailwind issue, but avoiding a big crosswind is what we're looking to do.
Yeah.
So it can sometimes, of course, be too windy to take off or land, and those limitations are in place for safety, so for the passengers and for the crew. And each aircraft does have different limits. Bigger airplane doesn't necessarily mean that you've got bigger wind limits.
Yeah, winds are more important really on landing than they are, or take off and landing than they are in a cruise. We can have jet streams in excess of 100 miles an hour in the cruise, which don't bother us or the aircraft in the slightest. But yeah, for takeoff and landing, they are crucial, aren't they? Do you know what I find funny, John? We talked about auto lands before. So let's say your aircraft has a 40 knot crosswind limit for landing, but for the auto land, that limit gets reduced to 10 knots probably.
Yeah.
And so, we've got all these fancy automatics that help us to, fly the aircraft and make our life easier for us. But as soon as it gets a bit windy, the automatics go, no.
Yeah.
You can do this one, guys.
Over to you, mate.
Yeah, I'm not helping you out at all. So, yeah, we don't like crosswinds, do we?
Yeah. But yeah, no, we don't. Well, I don't know. It can be fun sometimes. But yeah, too big a crosswind can be a problem. So yeah, I mean about 40 miles an hour across the runway is kind of what we want to avoid, and that's when you see those sort of hair-raising videos on the internet, on YouTube.
Yeah. How many degrees of bend in your palm tree would be a 40 mile an hour wind? Does it work like a windsock?
I think it'd have blown over by then. Yeah, it's got branch falling off now, so yeah.
Oh dear. Great. Well, thanks very much for that question, Sam. We have one final question this week, John, and that comes from Veronica in Massachusetts. She says, "I love the creation of the cruise altitude cheese board. So do we. We're very pleased with it. But she asks, what on earth is a ploughman's? This sounds very English," she says. Now, I listened back, John, to our last episode, and indeed you did touch on the idea of a ploughman's. So can you explain yourself, please?
A ploughman's. Well, Veronica, you need to find your local English delicatessen over in wherever you are in Massachusetts, Boston, I'm guessing, or something like that. A ploughman's it's an English institute. You know what a ploughman's is, Si, don't you?
I do, yeah.
It's an English institution. So I looked it up actually, just to give you an official answer. So it says a ploughman's lunch is an English cold meal based around bread, cheese and onions, usually accompanied by butter and pickles. Additional items, this is if you're feeling a bit exotic, such as ham, green salad, hard-boiled eggs and apple can be added.
Apple, yeah. Apple's a weird one to throw in.
Yeah, I'm not sure I want an apple on a ploughman's, but
it does,
essentially, Veronica, it does, but essentially, Veronica, it's what you eat in a pub, and it's a big chunk of bread with a bit of cheese and some pickles from Branston or other pickles or whatever. Yeah. It's a brand name, isn't it? But whatever.
It doesn't sound that appetising, to be honest with you.
Oh, you need to check it out.
Sounds a bit rustic, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
I think it comes from before pubs could serve hot food. I think it was a sort of a
working man's pub lunch.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, fair enough.
There you go.
I think I'll just have a pint. Brilliant. Well, thanks, Veronica, for that question. And if you're ever over in the UK visiting, then dip into your nearest pub and ask for a ploughman's.
I was trying to find if there was a sort of like Ploughman's Appreciation Society on the internet I could give a link to. We could maybe get them on, but I can't find one. But I'll leave that with me. Let me see. They're very popular over here in the UK. So yeah. Anyway, that is probably about where we should leave it. So it's all we've got time for this week. If you like the episode, please share it around. Get in touch. Let us know. We always love to hear from you. Also, if you can, please do leave us a review or rating. You can, of course, get in touch via our various social media platforms. As I mentioned earlier, we've got Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You can send us a message on our page, or you can send us a DM. You can email us as well at cruisealtitude@outlook.com, or you can log on to the website at cruisealtitude.com. We'll be back next time with all our usual features and segments, plus more questions from the mailbag.
Thanks for listening. For now, keep it down to earth with Cruise Altitude.
Thanks for listening to Cruise Altitude. Don't forget to subscribe via your favourite podcast provider, leave us a review and get in touch via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram. Links can be found over on our website, cruisealtitude.com. A down-to-earth podcast from Cruise Altitude.
I'm off to watch Line of Duty.
You'll be disappointed.
Well, we'll see.